Welcome to Unanswered. I'm Alex.
And I'm Maya.
For this deep dive, our goal is, well, it's pretty simple, but it's also demanding. We're going to look at the facts, the timeline, and the physical evidence of cases that have just defied explanation.
We really want to ground ourselves in what is actually known.
Exactly. Not get lost in what we imagine.
And I'm here to look at the human side of these stories, because behind every, piece of evidence, there are people, there are emotions and instincts and fear.
Today, we are opening a file that has become almost legendary in cold cases. It's a story that has obsessed people for, over 60 years now?
Oh, easily.
We're heading to the northern Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. The year is 1959.
And this story, it feels less like history and more like a nightmare you just can't wake up from. It's about a group of friends who went out into the snow and they just never came back.
We're talking about the Dyatlov Pass incident.
And the core of what happened on that mountain, even after all this time, it remains, unanswered.
That's the word for it. And because this case is so famous, it's also buried under, just an avalanche of myths and theories. So our mission today, in part one, is to strip all of that away.
Right.
We're going to walk through the expedition, the disappearance, and the moment the rescue team found their campsite.
So no speculation today. We're not talking about, aliens or secret weapons.
Right.
We are strictly looking at what was left behind in the snow. We have to understand the scene itself before we can even begin to try to understand what happened.
But let's start with the who. There's this tendency to see these hikers as incompetent, like they made a mistake.
Like teenagers in a horror movie who wandered off the path.
Yeah, exactly. But the source material, the actual records, they paint a completely different picture.
Yeah.
We need to be very clear about who these people were.
That's a crucial point. This wasn't a casual weekend trip. The group had 9 hikers, all from the Ural Polytechnic Institute.
They were young, mostly in their early 20s.
But in the Soviet hiking system back then, you didn't just, grab a backpack and go. It was a serious sport with really strict tiers.
Right. Hiking was a discipline. And this group, they were aiming for a grade 3rd certification.
Which was the highest difficulty rating in the Soviet Union at the time.
The highest. To even attempt that, you had to travel 300 kilometers in harsh winter conditions, carrying everything you needed to survive.
And the leader, Igor Dyatlov, he was known for being incredibly meticulous. He actually designed and built his own stove. These are people who knew how to survive in a blizzard.
They were fit, certified, technically proficient. And that competence is so important because it frames everything that comes later.
If they were amateurs, you could just write it off as panic.
Right, or ignorance. But these people knew exactly how to survive the cold. They knew the risks of the Urals.
They were prepared for the cold. They knew the risks. And yet, something happened that they couldn't handle. It makes you wonder, if experience wasn't enough, what would have been?
Let's talk about the environment they were stepping into. The northern Urals. This is remote, uninhabited terrain.
We're not talking about a national park with trails.
No, this is true wilderness. And the weather. We have to talk about how brutal it was.
Absolutely. The temperatures could drop below, minus 30 Celsius?
Minus 30. That's life-threatening cold. Exposed skin freezes in minutes. And you've got strong winds, deep snow. It's an environment that just does not forgive mistakes.
And they were heading toward a specific mountain.
A mountain called Otorten. But they never actually made it there. They ended up on the slopes of another mountain, Koletchiakal.
And this is one of those details that it sends a shiver down your spine, even if it's a coincidence. In the local Mansi language, Koletchiakal is often translated as Dead Mountain.
It definitely adds a layer of ominous foreshadowing. For the hikers, though, it was probably just another summit, a challenge.
But that name.
Well, the name probably refers to the fact that there's no game or vegetation there, not some ancient curse, but still it sets a grim tone.
I think we need to look at their mindset before they got there. And we actually can, because investigators found their diaries and cameras.
That's right. We aren't just guessing about their mood. We have their own words, their own images.
And looking at them, they seem happy, they're organized, calm, they're smiling in the photos, they're documenting their trip like any group of friends on an adventure.
There was absolutely no sign of fear or concern in their notes. Nothing to suggest they were under any unusual stress. They were just hiking.
That contrast is just heartbreaking. You look at those photos and you know it's coming. But they didn't. They went to sleep that night thinking about the next day.
So let's move to the timeline of the silence.
When they were supposed to check in.
Exactly. They had a protocol. They were expected to send a telegram from the nearest settlement viz-high when they finished.
A simple message. We made it. We're safe.
And the date for that message was around February 12th or 14th, but the date came
Yeah.
and went.
Nothing.
No message arrived.
At first, I'm sure people thought, oh, they're just delayed. A few days delay isn't uncommon on these trips. You try to rationalize it.
Of course. But as more days passed, the 15th, the 16th, that rationalization started to wear thin. Concern began to grow.
Imagine being one of the parents, just waiting for a telegram that never comes. The silence just gets heavier and heavier.
Eventually, the families demanded action, and that's when the search operation began. At first, it was volunteers, fellow students who knew the terrain.
But it escalated fast.
Very fast. Soon you had military and police personnel involved, aircraft, ground teams. It became a massive operation.
But they were looking for a needle in a haystack. I mean, hundreds of square kilometers of just snow.
You can just feel the shift in the search party's mood.
Yeah.
At the start, it's a rescue mission. There's hope.
But as the days turn into weeks, that hope starts to curdle into fear. It stops being a rescue and starts becoming a recovery.
And that dread all culminated on February 26, 1959. That's the day they finally made a discovery.
The moment the real mystery began.
A student volunteer, he spots this small, dark shape on the slope of Kolodzakal.
Dead Mountain.
Dead Mountain. It was the group's tent.
Just picture that. This huge, white, frozen landscape, wind howling, and just one tiny speck of canvas.
The tent was partially collapsed, covered with snow. But it was what they found, and I guess what they didn't find, at that campsite that changed everything.
This is where logic just starts to break down.
Inside the tent, they found, well, almost everything. Boots, warm clothing, food, equipment, axes, knives.
Let's just pause on that. We said it was minus 30 degrees Celsius outside.
At least.
Why would 9 experienced hikers leave their boots and coats behind? It's the first rule of survival.
It makes no sense. The boots were just there, lined up inside the tent.
And that's the first anomaly.
But the second one is even more disturbing. It's a forensic fact about the tent itself.
This is the detail that it gets me every time.
Investigators determined the tent had been cut open, slashed. But it wasn't cut from the outside, like someone was trying to get in.
It was cut from the inside.
From the inside.
Just think about the sheer panic that implies. You're in your only shelter from a lethal cold, and something happens that is so terrifying, you don't even take 2 seconds to unzip the door. You just slash your way out.
It suggests this desperate split-second need to escape. Getting out instantly was more important than anything else.
But here's the contradiction. You imagine this frantic scramble, right? But what about the rest of the tent?
That's the thing. There were no signs of a struggle inside. No fight. No blood. Everything was just left behind. It was all orderly.
So terrified enough to cut their way out, but not fighting anyone inside, it's like they were fleeing something external.
Let's follow them out of the tent. Let's talk about the footprints.
The tracks in the snow.
They found 8 or 9 sets of tracks leading away from the tent, down the slope toward a forest.
And this is where the panic theory hits another wall. If you're running from an avalanche or an animal, you expect to see chaos.
Exactly. Deep plunge steps, people tripping, falling. But these tracks, they suggested the hikers left in an orderly manner. The stride was normal. They weren't running.
They were walking.
They were walking.
In minus 30 degrees, without their boots.
That's the forensic reality. Many of the footprints showed they were barefoot or just in socks. Maybe one felt boot here or there.
It's just horrifying. I mean, can you imagine stepping onto that snow in just your socks? The pain would be instant, agonizing. And yet, they kept walking, calmly.
And they didn't scatter. They stayed together, moving down the slope away from all of their survival gear.
For me, that's the most unsettling part of this scene. It's the silence of it. The tracks don't show a struggle. They don't show speed. It looks like a trance or a surrender, just walking away from your shelter into the dark.
It defies every survival instinct. So let's just summarize this scene as it stood on February 26th, what the searchers were looking at.
Okay, you have an empty tent, half buried in snow on the side of Dead Mountain.
The canvas has been cut open from the inside.
All the gear boots, warm clothes, food is sitting right there.
And leading away from it all, 9 sets of footprints, some barefoot.
Walking calmly side by side down the mountain.
And then silence. The hikers were gone.
And the why was just completely missing.
It's a frozen scene of contradictions. Calmness and panic. Order and madness. Total preparation and total vulnerability.
You can just feel the searcher standing there looking at those tracks disappear into the trees and realizing that whatever happened here, It's not a normal accident.
Following those tracks into the forest, that was the next logical step. They had to find them.
But I have to warn you, what they found in that forest, that's where this story shifts. It stops being just a tragedy and it turns into something much, much darker.
The discovery of the tent was just the beginning. The state the hikers were in when they were finally found. It raises questions that are even harder to answer.
It's a nightmare that just gets worse the deeper you go.
But we have to stop here for now. We need to sit with this scene. The empty tent, the slashed canvas, the barefoot tracks in the snow. This investigation continues in episode 2 of Unanswered.
Join us then. You won't want to be alone for it.